Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I know we still have a few that will be entering, but I will do a little bit of housekeeping. And first, thank you for joining us for the third part of our SCION series for planning for 2021. We're really excited to have some representatives from Carl Mackey Power and Ross today, one of our key affiliate members with Sonoma County Vintners. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions for each topic, feel free to put them in the Q&A specifically. We'll be monitoring that more than the chat feature, and we'll try to address them at the turn of each topic, but we also will have a brief Q&A at the end as well. I'm really excited about this particular webinar because back in 2015, Sonoma County Vintners invigorated and ignited a government relations committee, and both Kim Cochran as well as David Ramey have been very integral in being a part of that. And we really took on a role at Sonoma County Vintners as a trade marketing association with a now leg in political advocacy at a local and state levels. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we do to really support our wine community and continue to move the ball forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim to tell a little bit about her experience with that, as well as introduce Jeremy Little with Carl Mackey Power and Ross to talk a little bit about the discussion points today.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me well. I'll try to speak slowly. I'm often accused of speaking too quickly. Speaking of quickly, the Governmental Relations Board has quickly made a lot of positive changes for vintners. I've been on it. I've seen a lot of really good people on that committee. At one point, we were meeting even every week for hours to try to change the this part of the organization to a more active participant in local government to represent vintners' interests. David Ramey will talk about this as well. One of the main things we've been trying to do for many, many years is change the policy of Sonoma County enforcement from treating everything you do as some special event that must require a special call out in your use permit to something that is just a regular business activity. The difference between a 400-person pickup party and hosting 12 distributors is huge, and they are different, completely different. One is a necessary business activity, and the other is more of a marketing business promotion. So I think there's been a lot of success over the years. I give vintners a lot of credit for staying with us on this. And David, if you want to add something to that, please do, and then we'll turn it over to Jeremy and start the program.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, and I think I pushed for this back when Honor Comfort was head of Sonoma County Vintners. I would ask her, Honor, how come Napa Valley Vintners has three legs to the stool: charity, marketing, and advocacy, and we only do charity and marketing, and then with the change, with Honor, leaving, we were able to take on this role of advocacy, and Kim mentioned state, but the principal relationship is with the county. Most wineries are in county land, not in city, and so the permitting issue is frankly, from my experience, horrendous, and there's a little element, and it is just a little element, of people who moved to wine country, retired to wine country, and then looked around and decided that there's too many wineries. And so it's, you read this all the time online, and we have, vineyards have taken over Sonoma County, they're raping the land, when in fact 6% of the surface area of Sonoma County is covered by vineyard land. So there's a lot of exaggeration, and then the planning commissioner members and some supervisors are prone to listen to that and sort of take that side. And I think, particularly with Mike Haney and then Mike Martini is the chair of government relations now, we've made tremendous progress in working more closely with the county in terms of understanding and recognizing our business and what it takes to succeed, and what the consequences would be for Sonoma County if there weren't vineyards and wineries.
So Jeremy, do you want to get us started on the program?
Of course. Thanks, Kim. Thank you, David. And again, special thanks to the vintners and again, especially Jesslyn for organizing and becoming a video expert and a Zoom webinar expert. Trying times indeed, but a great thanks and appreciation for the vintners for organizing, and thank all of you for participating and tuning in to us today. You Kim and David Ramey are here. John Dawson, another partner of mine at CMPR, is here to bestow some wisdom upon all of us. What we wanted to talk about today is first let David Ramey kind of give everybody a boots on the ground perspective, a winery owner's perspective of sort of, we all know how troubling this year's been, but kind of what everybody's doing to gear up and prepare for 2021. As COVID numbers continue to increase across country and locally, we're trying to get our handle on that. But what are wineries doing, again, in preparation for and creating strategies to be successful in 2021? John Dawson and I then will talk a bit about Grape Contracts, another big issue on everybody's mind with our fire season. We go from winter, spring, summer to fire. And so a lot of issues have come up in and around that. And then go back to Kim Cochran to talk a bit about issues surrounding PRMD, everybody's favorite county agency. There's been some changes there, especially with what's called VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and Kim will dive deep into that. If we have time left, we'll talk a bit about sort of the issues surrounding that ABC's been doing, and maybe a brief touch on sort of the general M&A, mergers acquisition market writ large. Again, allowing for some Q&A as we go along. So again, appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you for joining. And with that, David, why don't you chime in here? Take us away.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. So I talking to whoever's listening, and we'll get we get a list of your names later. But no surprises. I mean, this has been a very challenging year since the March shutdowns. I happen to be on my last plane trip of the year, doing a trade lunch and a consumer dinner in Orange County, and the day that Disneyland shut down, I was 2 miles away. Starting that trade lunch, and that was an eye opener. That's like, oh wow, this is pretty serious. And so there's 3 avenues to sell wine. You can sell wine direct from the winery, either by shipping or out the door. You sell wine to restaurants. You sell wine to retailers. And so what all of us in the business have had to do, I mean, the restaurants, 60% of our business was to restaurants domestically, and even I would say overseas too. We're in 28 foreign countries, and a lot of that is restaurant business. So when the restaurants shut down from San Francisco, New York, London, Germany, boy, they're our sales have been impacted. So fortunately, we strategically have always embraced quality retail. In every town, there's some fine wine retailers, and we've always had done business with them. So we were a little better positioned than some of our colleagues who were all DTC and some restaurant, because that whole restaurant just fell away. On the other side, everybody is ramping up their DTC, direct to consumer. But the problem is you've got to have outdoor tastings, and not everybody is situated for that. We have a parking lot outside one of our industrial buildings in Healdsburg with a shade and some barrels and stuff, and people actually seem to enjoy that. Sam Tisconi, our sort of DTC manager, says that they often say, "Oh wow, that was the best tasting of our trip." So there are some upsides to this. On the other hand, what's coming? Well, a little rain maybe starting tomorrow. I mean, it's cold now. And everything I talk about applies to the restaurants too. You know, I mean, here in Healdsburg, Campofina is well set up because with their outdoor dining, but right next door, Baci has no outdoor dining. So everything is just takeout. So we're moving into even more of a problematic time for winery visits and restaurant visits. And here's where I would say there's two developments just recently. In yesterday's Press Democrat, there's an article about the counties to ask the state for a reprieve. Apparently, there are some of these laboratories been doing the COVID tests that haven't been reporting them to the state. And it doesn't say why, I don't understand, but Dr. Mace is asking the state to allow those tests to be counted too, which could put us below the threshold where we could move from the purple to the red. And then additionally, I want to shout out for Sonoma County Tourism, which on the 26th of October sent an email to as many businesses as I think they could identify. And there's they set up between the state and the county, there are free testing sites, and they're encouraging wineries to have their entire staff, hospitality and production, tested weekly for the next 4 to 6 weeks. So here in Healdsburg, for example, it's every Wednesday from 9 to 11 in the farm labor area next to City Hall. And our team has gone and got tested twice. You get the results back in 24 to 48 hours. There's no cost. In fact, my wife Carla went yesterday, and she even got paid. She got a Visa card for $30. So not only didn't she have to pay for the test, she got paid to take the test. So this is a win-win. And just thinking about it strategically, you can understand an epidemiologist wanting to go where there's a lot of cases and run the tests there, so you can find out where the issues is and try to solve that. But from a business perspective, what we want to do is have all the healthy people tested so that our percentage positives can go down, and then we can move from the purple to the red to the next whatever it is. And particularly as the rain's coming. So that's the way I see things and where we stand now from my perspective. So there's some positive, I think, initial steps here in getting out of the purple potentially.
Great, thank you, David. I think the capture there is have heaters, tents, and get tested. If you have the space, get a tent, get some heaters, and let's get tested, and let's get Sonoma County out of the purple and down to orange, I think, whatever the lower color is. that'd be great. Thank you, David. I really appreciate that. Do a quick check, see if there's any Q&A yet. All right, nothing there yet. Mr. Dawson, let's bring you in. John and I definitely have spent a lot of time with Grape Contracts, especially it's odd that there's always a flurry of questions around Grape Contracts sort of beginning of the year, and then of course this past 4 or 5 years the issues certainly have arisen come August, September, October for many unfortunate reasons. But John, why don't you start off? And as I mentioned, John Dawson's a partner at CMPR. I'm sure many of you recognize his face, and let him chime in here on his experiences with Grape Contracts, smoke taint, and the sort of issues that flow from there. John.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right. Good morning, everyone. Jeremy, do me a favor. If I speak too loudly or too softly, just point at me. Thanks. Difficult 2020 year for all of us in many respects. And then, of course, we had the fun with the fires in August and September. And in the context of Grape Contracts, to the extent to which you have written Grape Contracts, David Ramey, who has sometimes a reluctance towards written contracts, but that's a different story for a different time, perhaps. For those of you who do have written Grape Contracts, you may recall seeing provisions relating to rejection, relating to grape quality, relating to defects. You may have a process by which, if there's a call to be made as far as a rejection of a certain a portion of the crop that you're supposed to be acquiring from a grower, that in the event of a dispute relating to that a third party might be brought in to help make a fair determination as to the quality of those grapes and the basis of the rejection, so on and so forth. And the idea being historically that obviously if these grapes aren't going to go to that buyer that day, well, then maybe there's some other buyer who will take them. If they should go to that buyer that day, well, the sooner that dispute can be resolved, the better, obviously, in terms of the quality of the grapes and having them become suboptimal just by sitting out for too long, perhaps in not the most ideal circumstances. Well, this year brought to light many additional issues that some contracts don't cover or don't cover in particular depth. In particular, I want to talk about the pre-harvest inspections. If we go big picture here, we have to think of the dynamic between the grower and the winery buyer, the grape buyer, as a dynamic that is decades and multi-generational in length, right? It can't be seen as a one-off, one-time relationship where this grower is fungible and that grower is fungible as the buyer needs, so on and so forth. I think history has shown that the best grapes and the best wines are made where you have, if it's not an estate, farmed and owned vineyard, then it's a winery that's working very closely with a conscientious grower who is very much committed to using the viticultural practices that the winery would like to see done at an optimal level of execution to produce the optimal grapes for the type of wine that winery wants to make. And to get to that level of cooperation and trust, you have to have a lot of give and take, a lot of working together, sometimes sleepless nights on both sides, whether it's frost, whether it's fire, smoke. But you have to see each other as some type of long-term business partner. And if you have that relationship, which, as I said before, lends itself to making great wine, then you have to, in many respects, look out for the best interest of your business partner, the counterparty. And one way of doing that, if you are the winery buyer, is to tell them upfront in late August or mid-August, when the fires are happening or when it looks like we're on the cusp of a pretty nasty fire season, hey, you know what? I'm not really interested in taking anything that's below perfect this year. And for whatever reason it may be, maybe I've got so much 2019 and 2018 that I've got to deal with, whether it's just I'm concerned and I don't know how to deal with smoke taint, or I've never had an experience with it before. I don't know how to address it in terms of blending or whatever the case may be. I think it's incumbent upon the winery, the grape buyers, to prior to harvest, as soon as possible, have that discussion, especially as fire season seems to be starting earlier and earlier and earlier in California, at least. Then beyond that, in terms of that big picture discussion, the other issue is, okay, what happens when? What happens when, in terms of the grapes that may or may not be subject to certain methyl glycol levels in a mini ferment situation, or based on just organoleptic examination, or just based on just what's going on in the local mesoclimate and microclimate, and in terms of smoke, fire, ash, etc., heat, and other concerns. And to address that now in a contract long term. And you can address those issues with respect to smoke taint and ash and fire exposure, heat exposure, and so forth in many different ways. And I don't think we have the time to get into all the many ways one can address this. But obviously, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have heard the discussions that have been going on about sliding scale parameters with respect to if grapes are not rejected prior to harvest, and they are accepted, on delivery, that perhaps there could be a sliding scale component that's worked into the contract whereby at certain methyl glycol levels, the purchase price will be reduced by X%. To make that actually work, again, you have to go back to the relationship of trust. And sometimes you also have to be thinking about the insurance carriers as well. What's going to hold up? What's going to be valid to the extent to which any insurance is going to come into play, which is a whole other story, as I'm sure, unfortunately, many of you are aware. The circumstances under which it will and won't come into play. But thinking these issues through beforehand, having those heart-to-heart discussions, those hard discussions now with respect to next year and next 5, 10, 20 years with your between the growers and the wineries, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to participate in with good faith, with a sense of cooperation and mutual respect, and through that process, I think we can get to a place that is better than the place you end up when you don't have any of that spelled out. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, John. Again, the relationship, in my experience, and I think in John's experience, as he was just describing, that relationship between the grower and the winery is so important. And I think back, I was not practicing 25 years ago, but David Freed and his group saw the issues 25 plus years ago between wineries and growers, and created a conference and symposium and a sort of gathering of growers and wineries so they could have a reasonable, rational discussion rather than point fingers and litigate. The goal is to resolve these issues beforehand, so as that relationship can maintain, a friendly atmosphere. Neither side works alone; they need to work together. And as John mentioned, that relationship is important. That talking ahead of time. And it's interesting, just on the testing. A lot of times, in years past, whether it was UC Davis or another sort of similar. Somebody would come and test and be able to test these grapes for defects. That's no longer a viable option. And as I think many of you ran into this year, I think right before Labor Day, ETS was testing about 3 days. Results turned around in about 3 days. Right after Labor Day, I think that went to about 43 days. And at CMPR, we had a number of clients that sent samples up to British Columbia and over to Australia, and I'm sure a number of you folks realize that those results came back much quicker than you could have here locally. And of course, with Australia sort of counter seasonal to us, that would make sense. Those labs probably not very active, at least wine testing at that time. But David, do you want to chime in at all with something here? Just a commentary.
Well, just to reemphasize the point both you guys made. I mean, John joked earlier, and we've had this conversation in a prior seminar. I mean, to me, the best contract is a handshake deal, because then everybody going to do what they say they're going to do, and that. And we have decades-long relationships with Larry Hyde, with the Martinellis, with the Duttons, with Joe Rocchioli, Kent Ritchie, and we don't have anything. Well, Dutton, there's a short contract, but otherwise, we don't have anything written down, and we communicate, we talk, and there's no surprises. Whereas in my experience, when you see that, apologies, I'm sorry guys, when you see that 14-page lawyer written contract coming, somebody's looking for trouble. And if you're looking for trouble, trouble will find you. So the relationship is everything. And one of my favorite stories was, some business guys were going to cut a deal, and the one guy shoved a contract across the table at the desk and the other guy pushed it back. He said, "I deal with people, not paper." And honestly, That's sort of the way I prefer to work.
And so David Ramey
no,
will never be asked back again to a legal seminar.
No, I remember working with Bill Smith at La Jota 2000, the first harvest I ever came out to work crush when I was a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan for 2 weeks. And I was a young lawyer, third year associate or something. And I could not believe that, that he didn't have written contracts. I said, really? I mean, and it was just the same thing. I mean, it's very old school and I respect it. And when you've done it that long with those people who are your neighbors, who you have those long-term relationships with in the community, right? They're not going to run and they're not going to hide, they're not going to Larry Hyde. No, okay. Hi, Larry. You're going to have long-term relationships based on that idea of mutual cooperation for mutual benefit. And that's fantastic. That is, I mean, quite frankly, I think that's an amazing statement as to your integrity and the integrity of your business partners, David. And also the thoroughness with which you approach this and the honesty and the care. The reality is not every winery owner, winemaker is like David Ramey. And not every grower is like, the Martinellis or the Hydes or the Duttons or whomever, the Rogalys, in terms of the care with which they approach it. We've all heard the stories of the cowboys on both sides of the equation, right? And the rogue elements and the people who are just out for themselves or who take liberties, even in a great year. And so in a year like 2020, when there's so many things coming at you and there's so many decisions that have to be made in the middle of the night sometimes on very little sleep, under the existing stress in which we're all, trying to survive with respect to COVID and the shutdown and so forth and business and so forth, right? Having a degree of comfort in knowing that you've thought through these various permutations and possibilities and how things are going to play out under certain circumstances will maybe help you get that extra hour of sleep.
Yeah, and on that, we've got two quick questions here. I just want to address the first one regard to sort of smoke taint provisions that we're seeing. And, a lot of them we're creating ourselves here at CNPR, but I think John referenced this sort of sliding scale. And one of the ones, again, the goal from our perspective as well is to create a win-win situation for both. You hope that the growers have crop insurance. And as far as the smoke taint provisions that we're seeing and that we're drafting and working with, have sort of that sliding scale where, a certain amount is picked, sent off to a lab. There's some sensory analysis. There's testing. There's maybe contingent acceptance. We'll take and we'll see what it looks like, and then there may be a drop depending on the glycol, methyl glycol levels. Price could be affected. So, John, do you want to chime in? I mean, those are that's a lot, sort of generally speaking, without getting too specific. We're seeing some of those sensory analysis tests, other lab, i.e. ETS lab testing, and results returned and discussions continued.
Right. Well, okay. So again, there's not enough time to go too far into detail here, but just all the big picture bullet points, which is number one, pre-harvest, vineyard walkthroughs, micro ferments, where it's agreed upon certain parameters as far as the winery or a rep of the winery coming to take grape samples across X blocks or whatever, and certain, again, specified parameters. The micro ferment being, sent to a lab for analysis. So that comes within let's call that the box, the pre-harvest box of the anticipation as to what may or may not happen, the concerns, and as you get closer to harvest, depending on the amount of smoke, fire, ash, etc., what you can see in terms of the micro ferment, right? So that's a whole bucket with its own set of details. In terms of once the grapes are harvested and picked and delivered, you've got to be careful about, Jeremy was talking about the term conditional acceptance. You've got to be careful about that term when you're talking about contracts, what's going to be enforceable, what's going to be non-problematic as far as insurance coverage for both parties, to the extent to which both parties have insurance coverage. So the terminology in the contract has to be very, very sensitive to the crop insurance issues that come into play and other insurance issues that come into play. So you don't want to throw conditional acceptance or revocation or anything like that. You don't want to just throw that into a contract without really covering all those bases, checking those boxes. Then beyond that, with respect to the sliding scale as far as the tonnage per ton pricing adjustment, you have to have parameters with respect to when the methyl guaiacol and guaiacol tests are going to take place, right? You may want to have provisions allowing for the grower or the wine or the grower to have a rep when the samples are pulled from the barrels and have them be taken from neutral barrels, as opposed to, triple toasted, heavy toasted, Taranto, whatever, right? As neutral as possible. Then you want to have, right, as Jeremy was saying, in terms of the test that would go out and agreed upon, testing, testing site 1, 2, 3, whether it's ETS, British Columbia, Australia, whatever your 3 may be, okay, with an idea of getting it back by X date. And you have to also have the parameters, keep in mind as to when those tests are going to be made, when those samples are going to be pulled, right? You can't, it's not going to do any good if 60 days after harvest, a grower gets a letter from a winery and says, hey, yeah, we tested this and it's whatever, 4.5, 2.1, whatever it might be. That's not particularly helpful. You need to get on the testing. If there's concerns on the winery side and you have the sliding scale approach in play, the testing has to be done very, very soon in the fermentation process. So those are some of the details. And then again, the sliding scale percentage, okay, if it's over X, it goes down 10%. If it's X plus 10, 20%, 30%, whatever it might be.
David, David, we have a question for you also. Just how did you deal with the smoke taint issue this year? And do you know if your growers had crop insurance? And then the little quick follow up on that. And if they did not have crop insurance, did you pick? Well, either way, if they had it, did you pick? If they didn't, did you pick?
Yeah, so let's roughly categorize growers as small independent growers who tended to not have crop insurance versus larger, let's say, the Duttons or Redwood Empire, they're farming 1,000 acres. And they're not only dealing with smaller wineries like us, but they're dealing with large wineries like Coppola and Kendall Jackson, et cetera. The smaller growers without insurance, we're having conversations well in advance. We did what testing we could. We couldn't always get results. And we took some of those grapes. This is reds. Let me just specify that white, as far as I'm concerned, there's no issue with white grapes if you're not doing skin contact or making orange wine. White grapes are whole cluster pressed. There's no time for extraction. There's no alcohol for extraction. So, the whites are fine. So this is only a red issue. And we took 4 out of 5 Pinot Noir vineyards, and the 5th one, which was the deepest into Green Valley, so the coldest, so the latest to ripen, that tested positive, and more than it should have, and that was farmed by the Duttons, and so we said, look, here's the results. We're not interested in these grapes. They're professionals. They have a lot of contacts. No problem. We just didn't take that fruit, and I'm sure they found somebody else. What I think is going to happen with a lot of fruit. There's some unharvested fruit this year. But well into the smoke taint days, there were some large wineries processing a lot of fruit, and I'm sure they got it at less than $500 a ton, and that's going to be RO'd, reverse osmosed, which can take some of the smoke taint out, but also strips the wine. And I think there's going to be a lot of wines made that are going to be on the bottom shelf at Long's Drugs, et cetera. And new unknown labels that you know, show up at Trader Joe's. There's going to be a lot of that. So at this point, we're still hanging back on payment for the couple, 3 of those, you know, growers, smaller independent growers who didn't have insurance. And, you know, the basic approach is analogous to what I was saying earlier. Look, you know, do you want to work with this person next year? If you want to work with this person next year, you know, you don't screw them. So, you know, that's the way we approached it.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then again, right, relationship. Hopefully that's strong, intact, and this is the time where you get to rely on each other and help each other out. There was a real quick question about insurance and contracts and pricing, and might be able to come back to that. But my sense is on that question with insurance and contracts and pricing is probably determined by policy. And so you may want to talk, the person who asked that question may want to check with their insurance agent where they're getting insurance from, and then connect with their attorneys as to what is required. And with that, I think we'll transition from the wonderful world of grape contracts and smoke taint provisions to a different headache in dealing with county and our PRMD. And with that, Ms. Cochran, Kim Cochran, why don't you take this away?
So kind of hard to follow a relationship conversation with talking about PRMD. But I will say that to some extent, the relationships that one has with people at PRMD can carry the day when you ever have a trouble. I actually met David, who's over there on my screen. I met David, unfortunately, because he was having trouble with PRMD, and ultimately we had to take his project, as many of you know, to the Board of Supervisors. So it was a pleasure and an honor to be able to represent him and his family, and met a great guy along the way. The goal with every case that I have, every client who comes to me and asks for legal help with a use permit or a PRMD matter, my goal is to solve it without PRMD ever knowing I had anything to do with it. The best way to solve these problems is relationships with people, both at the staff level at PRMD, sometimes with the director as well. And as David knows, sometimes you have to go to the policymakers, the supervisors themselves. I have a short period of time and a lot of slides, many of which may not be that interesting anyway. But let's just go ahead and get started. This is supposed to work. Let's see if it does.
You might need to enable editing first.
No, are we there?
Not full view. If you hit enable editing, it might let you go full screen.
Well, I am full screen. But I guess testing things never works out the way you think it should. Well, if we're okay going it this way, I'm just going to do it this way for now. Hi, I'm Kim Cochran. This is a PRMD update. There's 4 basic things I want to talk about. One has to do with staffing. I'm sorry that we have to talk about staffing, but we do. The other is procedural changes within PRMD, and some of those are for the better, believe it or not. There's this VMT, which is a brand new way of doing traffic analysis. And the other is some discussion about COVID-19. Many of you may know more about the COVID-19 ordinance than any lawyer in town. But on staffing, as many of you know, there's retirements, we had a lot of stability in PRMD for a while. That has left with retirements. There's also a pay disparity issue at the county where local jurisdictions pay more than the county. And so people come, then they leave. There's also some departments, which just must be terrible to work in because you can never get any staff there. And then COVID-19 has its own issue. We're hosting this webinar, of course, across the hallway from me. I have 2 boys attending college. We're all just doing the best we can. Talking about retirement, in particular, right here, many people have advanced. Scott Orr took Milan's position. There's mixed results. The general gist from everyone I'm speaking with is that the PRMD staff is much more conservative than they used to be, which means if they can say no, they want to say no. If they can make you go back and ask for something which is you think is stupid, they're going to ask for something that's stupid. So you're going to have to build a little bit more time into your project. You're going to have to be a little more cajoling, a little more relationship based with them. There's a problem in the permit tech department, which is Holly is retired and she hasn't replaced yet. And that is a real bottleneck right now. Plan check, some good news on plan check. Brian Waters has shortened the plan check time to only a few weeks. So this is in building. As a reminder, PRMD has two pieces to it: planning, where dreams go to die, and building. And the plan check is a building issue. Well and septic, as many of you know, it's always a staffing issue problem here. You might build up a relationship with one person only to find that that person is gone. They are getting some really good input from the contractor at the Resiliency Center. That's a different group of people, and they're really learning a lot from how the Resiliency Center is working. A problem, of course, is that the Emergency Operations Center, every time there's an emergency, every time there's a fire or flood or who else, whatever has happened, PRMD staff are required to leave their jobs and go work for the EOC, rotating 24-hour shifts. So there's already a staffing problem, and that just adds to it. You know, I have two kids going to college across the way. Jeremy has at least one kid in the room with him doing his homework. Everybody's doing the best they can. We have to remember that, and when we have these relationships with the PRMD people, it's harder to hold them accountable, but they do save a little time by not being at that public desk. Some people have said they're slower. Some people have said they're faster. I've only found them to be slower, but maybe that's because people only call an attorney when things are slower. There's more reliance on electronic submissions. That has some benefits and some detriments. We don't really have any choice, and so that's just what it is. So that's what I wanted to talk about with regard to staffing. Moving on to procedural changes, they've changed the way they do internal tracking. They were going to do that anyway, but with COVID, I think it's a wonderful idea. Managers have better information flow now. Staff used to, honestly, this isn't hyperbole, staff used to keep projects in those Trader Joe's grocery bags or Safeway grocery bags on their floor. Very difficult for anybody who wanted to see what was going on with that project. So it's a little bit better on that now. I want to talk about code enforcement, which always gives everybody a headache. Right now, code enforcement is not worried about use permit or zoning issues, which is a nice respite from everybody. It's put a stop to many of my hearings, which is good. It gives the winery a chance to get things in order and hopefully avoid those hearings. It also means that they're not worried so much about use permit compliance. They're worried with COVID-19 compliance. Good news, it's still a complaint-based system. People aren't going to come out and do random checks. And they're only looking for gross code violations. So we saw in the paper today that there were those penalties assessed against the race operator. If you read the article, most of their penalties were just for not getting the right permits, a very little penalty for the COVID-19 fiasco it must have caused. Interestingly, and this is only in building, that they appear to allow you now to pay overtime to somebody to get your job done faster, which is terrible because it means that people who have money go to the top of the line, and it's not supposed to work that way. So I don't like it, but nobody asked me. And how does one decide what's really overtime and what you could do during your regular time? But I have not had to have that come up. I hope I never do. And it is appeared to be limited to just building folks. Riparian Corridors. This is an interesting, almost all the great ag land is near a riparian corridor. Shout out to Dave and his family. They have done a lot to repair the riparian portion of dried grape on their property. And many wineries have done the same. Wineries with the Riparian Corridor, if you're going to do any work in the Riparian Corridor right now, they've changed it. And now environmental health gets involved right up front, which speeds up the process. You get all the crazy, stupid comments at once. It's really a big help. Very efficient use of staff time. So that is a definite positive development with PRMD. The next piece is what I talked about before, which is EOC. That's the Emergency Operations Command Center. County council is required to have shifts there, so things get slowed down legally. PRMD is required to have a representative there. This may be a public policy issue, but emergencies aren't emergencies anymore. It just seems to be every fall we have emergencies. So every fall, projects that go through PRMD are slowed down because people have to go work at the EOC. So this is sort of a policy issue. If you happen to have one of the supervisors at an event, you might want to just say, hey, I want to talk to you about something. Just a thought. Maybe they could get extra funding for that quarter, and I don't know quite what to do with it. The last here, this is my transition slide between something we all wish we didn't have to talk about. So staffing and VMT. VMT is vehicle miles traveled. It's a brand new way that these state, all projects throughout the state and therefore throughout the county have to work on use permit modifications or use permits. The problem is four staff members have been pulled away from their duties to work on this VMT issue. So there's not only an uphill battle with what is VMT, but there's the problem that those staff members are taking time away from other jobs in order to solve the VMT issue. VMT, everybody used to talk about LOS, which is loss of level of service, level of service, you know, whether it was whether your road was an ABC and whether what you did would change how crowded the road would be in your immediate neighborhood. Now they're not as worried about that anymore. Now they want to talk about greenhouse gases. This took effect in July. You think they would have thought about it before, but there were a few things happening before July. So there is no county guidance yet, but you still have to comply. And Jeremy and I know this because we've been pushing through one of the very first projects at the county, I think, to involve VMT, and it's been very complicated getting it through. The goal, I mean, it's a great goal, right? I mean, it's to promote alternative transportation. If you have a plumbing shop in town, you have to meet these VMT requirements and get people to take maybe the bus to your plumbing shop. Doesn't work so well for a winery. The goal is to promote walking, biking, public transit, things that just don't work for wineries. Carpooling, sort of. One of the things that we should be talking about in the future are the possibility of the use of vans, but some use permits, I've seen them, have restrictions that prevent you from using a van. So we're going to have to work this out. When you're going through a new project, there's a lot of things to talk about, but one way we can get some gains is working on the staff. You can't control the customers. It's very uncertain. The way that I'm reading much of the literature around VMT, every person gets counted, even though people don't go to wineries, every person. They go as a group or as a couple. And there's an issue about airline miles, especially for our county that draws people from all over the world. Those airline miles are greenhouse gas emission problems, and those are likely going to be part of the VMT analysis. It's really quite something that has to work on. County doesn't have guidelines yet. They were required to have them by July. There's a default provision in the state law, so we're using the state guidelines now, which there's a lot of variance in the state, and they're not thinking about wineries. The county is working on hotels first. I'm told by the county they'll have it by the end of 2020. I bet you $5 it's not going to happen. Bet you $100 it's not going to happen. There is a safe harbor provision if you're trying to get a use permit or use permit modification. Hardly anybody's going to meet it. The safe harbor is 110 daily trips, and that's just not going to work. You have any events at all, it's not going to happen. So just as a reminder, VMT is going to apply to all new use permits, but also any use permit modification that an existing winery has. One thing to talk about when you're preparing the project, and this is sort of legal stuff and certainly dealing with traffic, but we're including level of service analysis anyway because the county likes to see it. The supervisors would want to see it, and I think as long as you meet your level of service requirements, we're including those in the projects anyway. I'm told through the rumor mill that the way we're going to solve VMT in Sonoma County is through carbon offsets. There's going to be a county-wide carbon offset into which you can pay to offset your VMT. Absolutely no details yet. I'm glossing through VMT. I could spend 2 hours on a VMT seminar, but it's bad news. So let's not spend too much time on bad news. But it's uncertain guidelines, difficult to meet. If you have any events or activities even at all, we expect it will get better with time. Now I'm going to move on to something that's much more fun to talk about, which is the COVID-19 ordinance. Before I get to the COVID-19 ordinance, I want to say that one of the things that the county has really done, they have really understand their economic basis. They really understand that agriculture drives the economy. And they, at least at PRMD, I really do feel that right now. I haven't felt that in the past. I do feel it now. Some initial comments before we talk about the actual ordinance itself. There's other ordinances that have provided extensions. So if you have a tentative map, a lot line adjustment, a use permit that may or may not expire, or legal non-conforming use, those whatever expiration dates they have been extended. I could speak an hour as to each one of those. They all have different extension dates. They all have different criteria, but I just wanted to give you that little bit of good news. This is the ordinance. So if you're looking on the PRMD website and you're looking for what ordinance you should be looking at, it's called this, an urgency ordinance. It goes on and on and on. They all sort of sound the same after a while. The big picture is outdoors is safer than indoors. They've extended the hours that you're allowed to be open, use permit hours notwithstanding, and they're giving you some events flexibility. So if you have, your use permit allows you to have a 100-person event. You can break it down now and have 5 20-person events and you're fine. You can't increase the number. You can't have 20 20-person events. And you probably have to keep track of them on a piece of scratch paper and report to somebody at the end. No one's quite sure. It's effective until 30 days after expiration of some very vague thing. So nobody knows when it's going to end, but there'll probably be more guidance on this. I say it's going to happen for a while. Let's not worry about when it ends, unfortunately. Let's see. I'm going to skip a couple slides, sorry. So they talk about ag promotion and they talk about agricultural experiences, which is a big shift for them. I had a client who got popped, if you will, for having vineyard tours because it wasn't specifically called out in the winery's use permit. This is a big sea change here. They're promoting wineries giving walks, hikes, picnics, and tours, but just not an event, whatever that means. Brief shout out actually to vintners. One of the things we've been trying to do at vintners is define events and define activities. PRMD uses these terms, but they have no definitions yet. But I do want to note the fact they do talk about activities and they talk about events, and that's a positive change here. Requirements for outdoor activities. You can't grade something to make an outdoor space. You either have it or you don't. So if it's a parking lot or a graveled area, you're in great shape, or even a lawn. And it has to be the same legal parcel. And I advise many of you to get some help on this. A lot of wineries are comprised of several parcels put together, and only one parcel might hold the actual use permit. And that is one way that if they get a complaint, it's easy for them to check. So that's an easy way for the winery to have some problems there. They're requiring it 300 feet from an off-site residence, which means if you have an off-site, a neighbor that's a resident that lives there, you have to have these things 300 feet from that person. Not every winery has that ability, so do check that out. The usual no sound, things like that apply. Indoor spaces, you can have some temporary indoor spaces, but you have to restore it to normal. Don't think that you're going to have it for a while. They're very clear on that. A few words about tents. It's very complicated. The county's going to come out with a set of guidelines shortly. Tennis Wick told me next week. Only one sidewall is allowed or you will get cited. As a note, if you have a tent that has no sidewalls, you may not need much of a permit at all. So give some consideration to that. Food service,
I think that's called a tarp.
well, or a pop-up, like with, with kids' sports, exactly. A big pop-up. The pop-up can be 700 square feet. I mean, it could be a really big pop-up. Food service, just a shout out, it has to be local food. Just be careful. I don't think they're gonna ever know, but in case you wanna know. There was a October 31st sunset to the public tasting hours exception. I think if you just sort of forgot that it's sunsetted, that would be fine and go to 7, but you did not hear that here. Things that stay the same, you cannot, if you have numerical limitations in your use permit, you have to stay with them. Number of employees, you can't increase your number of employees. They're not letting you change everything in your use permit, only some of the things. This agricultural experience is new. It's a big shift in county policy, and I expect it to stay. I think it's first of all, it's good, and it adds a different experience for everybody, and I think it's a great idea. There are a lot of requirements to them. I'm keeping an eye on the time. I won't bore you with too much of them, but you can only have 4 per month. And you can only have a few people. The fewer of 49 people, or whatever the winery's on-site limit is. And you have to comply with everything else. Note that this has a 7 p.m. Extension that does not appear to have the 1031 sunset provision. So as a lawyer, I always look for loopholes. So I would just say that everything's an agricultural experience and go to 7. Keeping an eye on the time. There's always something new at PRMD. Just call me and ask. Happy to help you out. PRMD website has a lot of really good resources. They've done a good job of keeping it current. And then I will get out of this and stop sharing and see if there's any questions. And I'm on time. Who knew?
Look at that. Well done, Kim. I'm not seeing any question as yet. I mean, certainly key takeaway, of course, there is one of them, at least, if you're looking toward 2021 and either looking for a new use permit or a use permit modification, and you are in that process now of getting an application started. I think Kim and I, one of those that we started meeting with the clients and sort of this time last year. We got things organized by February. All of a sudden it's March. It was April, May when it was submitted. And of course, now you're only a few months away from that Q3, our fire season, where staff maybe is cut in half or even more. So planning out for 2021, you keep that in mind unless the county can get additional funding. It certainly appears, as it has over the last 4 or 5 years, that staff at PRMD will nearly disappear from, say, mid-August to November, as unfortunate as that is. So again, part of this, what the veterinarians here are doing is, we're looking out to 2021 and trying to plan and create strategies. So there you go. That's a big one. And of course, the other one that Kim highlighted there with VMT, if we had a crystal ball, it would be great. But that is a bit of a hornet's nest.
Jeremy, if I may.
Yeah.
The problem with the VMT is if a project was submitted before July, before the VMT was in place, it nonetheless must comply. It's at the time the traffic analysis is performed by the county. So the project that we've been working on was submitted in April, which was before July. We still have to comply with VMT. So anything that's pending will have this VMT problem. Sorry, Jeremy, I just wanted to spread some more good news.
No, and not just, I was gonna, it is, absolutely true. And what our experience is that is the traffic consultants are as perplexed as we are. So we're trying to figure this out, doing, from our legal perspective. We're speaking with traffic consultants who do this all the time, and they are, have the same questions and same queries, and nobody truly understands where this is going. And again, as Kim highlighted, that the 110 and under safe harbor, that very few folks are going to meet that at this point.
All right.
So go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to say, I think I don't want to keep people past the school bell.
So just maybe one quick lap through ours with final thoughts looking out into 2021. Mr. Dawson, would you like to start us off with some final thoughts?
When in doubt, always order Italian. I mean, I don't know. No, just, we'll get through it together, but everybody's got to work in good faith, got to prepare that much more than they normally would because of all the delays inherent in all of these systems, processes, and protocols because of all the external issues we're all dealing with. I think that's my big takeaway for 2021 in terms of planning ahead, right? The discussions that you said, well, maybe I'll have that 2 years from now. Start thinking about it now, get it in play, because like you're saying, there are going to be more delays, fewer staff, fewer people to help at all the various agencies, local, county, and state that come into play. ABC as well, we've seen it here, really sad. Someone passed away unexpectedly at the ABC here in Santa Rosa, which has contributed to various delays in terms of various license processing, application processing, and other things. Sacramento's been backed up. So the only way you can deal with that is to plan early and plan ahead as thoroughly as possible.
Thanks, John. David, final thoughts?
Oh yeah, don't spend any money you don't need to.
Yep, the piggy bank for a rainy day that's going to be needed. Absolutely. Thank you. Kim?
Final thoughts, when you go for a use permit modification or a new winery use permit, do not do what they tell you to do. Do not fill out that simple form and turn it back in. That's where all the planning needs to happen, is turn in as complete a package as you can. A lot's going on there. They really need more help and direction on the applicant's end than ever before.
Excellent. Well, a big thanks, John, David, Kim. I appreciate it. Of course, Jesselyn and Sonoma County Vintners. Thank you again so much, all of you, whoever is out there watching. I appreciate it. I know the Vintners is recording this, so this will be archived on their site, and I think made part of their email blast. And as I think everybody's highlighted here, a relationship, whether you're grower, winery, PRMD, your neighbor, the relationships are key. And having a team in place, a trusted team in place, attorneys, accountants, bankers, friends, and neighbors, that's going to help us all get through. So with that, again, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And best of luck to a much better 2021. Take care, everybody.